Book of James, chapter 1. We've been here for a few Sundays now as we've been talking about how to keep on keeping on. For I think we can identify and recognize that we live in an age, in a society whereby it is difficult at times to be motivated because there's so many things going on around us that oftentimes we feel unmotivated, uninspired, if you will. And it seems that it's very easy to become depressed, downtrodden, discouraged, discarded with regards to the pressures of society. And yet, it seems that for us, we recognize the need to keep on. But then there are times where we lack the power and the motivation to move on. And so I have shared with you a few things that seems that the book of James brings us, or the epistle, the letter of James brings to us. And so in those first few verses of chapter 1, we've talked about some things that will help us to keep on keeping on. You know, we know that there's others out there. We're not by ourselves. We need to embrace joy and not sadness. At times where we must have patience in order to keep on keeping on. Walk in perfection. Don't settle for second best, but be the best. Welcome wisdom. You need wisdom, not just knowledge, but you need the things that God gives you so that you might keep it on and keep keeping on. And we must thank God for spiritual discernment. There are times where we want to push by wisdom, but we need that. And then don't get on the high seas. You know, sometimes we're in up and down, up and down, up and down. And the Lord wants us to practice stability. Then we recognize that we shouldn't look for something out of nothing. If you want to keep on keeping on, life takes some work. It takes some temperance. It takes some self-control. And once again, you need to be stable. You need to be stable in that. And then, you know, we talked about on last week is don't get caught up in yourself. Don't get so egotistical that you think that you're the only one. Because God can and will use somebody else if he wants to and when he wants to. So you're not the only one, and it is about God. It's not about us. And then recognize that your stuff will not last forever. Sister Risa Moore, sometimes we begin to feel like we are eternal creatures, when in fact our life is but a breath. And there shall come a day when he shall call, and we must be ready to answer. And so today we find ourselves again in James chapter 1, this letter, this epistle that he wrote generally to the church, to those who were scattered, as he says. And then we begin at verse 12. Verse 12 says this. It says, "Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life which the Lord hath promised to them that love him." And notice in that particular verse, he says, he shall receive the crown of life. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. And then in verse 13, he says, "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempted he any man." And every single verse goes on to tell us certain things, such as verse 16. It says, "Do not err." Look at verse 16, it says, "Do not err." Verse 24 says, For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continueth, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work. There's several verses there, and each verse seems to tell us that there are certain things in life that trap us. In the first few verses, it seems that he's saying that temptation can trap us. In verse 15, he says that lust can trap us. There are times in verse 24 and 25, as we read there, that sometimes we are trapped by ourselves and by certain laws and rigidness and so on and so forth. And so in order to keep on keeping on, I would first admonish us not to get trapped. Don't get trapped. Oh, if you could teach the little bunny rabbits that, they wouldn't end up on the dinner table. It's important for us to recognize that there are traps in life that are set for us, and one of the finest things we can do is begin to recognize when we're headed toward a trap. Oh, you don't hear me yet. What I'm saying to you is that life comes with its own traps, and those traps will allow you to get bogged down in the situation, not realizing that you don't have to worry about the situation because this too shall pass. There are times in life where we are focused on the now and we allow the now and the past to negate the future. Let me tell you that just because you're having some hard days and just because today seems a little weary for you, don't allow that to pronounce what your future shall be. Sometimes we get trapped in this moment and we become disabled to go on to the next moment. I want you to hear me now. Sometimes we get trapped in this moment and we're unable to move on to the next moment. Okay, well, let me show you what I mean. You've heard me say before that it's important that you don't hang out in places where you know there are those tempters, snares that might be after you. And so just say, for instance, you are over at this mall over here. I tell you, I talk about this mall because it's a real interesting place. I like to come through the door on the side and go to the Christian bookstore and back out the door on the side. I don't like going in there. And I don't like going in there on the weekend either. There are too many naked people in there. And so the fact is, we all know that there are times when there are certain temptations that lurk. And so if you know that there are certain temptations afoot in certain places, guess how not to get trapped? Don't go. And so if you recognize those traps, then you've got to not go. Why? Because there is a moment where you've allowed yourself to be tempted too long. See, the text doesn't tell us that we'll never be tempted. It tells us that God won't do it. But don't you know that there is an enemy out there that will? And because there is an enemy out there that will, what we must recognize is when we've stepped outside of the safety and the privilege and the presentation that God puts forward. You see, there ought to be an alert system. Now, I don't have a new car. I got an old car, but I watch the commercials. And on those new cars, they got the new Mercedes-Benz, the new Cadillac, and that kind of thing. They got this system that watches you while you drive. They've got a system that has some type of infrared sensor that looks right in your eyes. And they've got a sensor, and that sensor, it watches you while you drive. And no soon as you doze off a little bit or your car begins to veer off the road, it sounds an alarm. And it lets you know that you're about to fall off to sleep. Every single one of us as Christians ought to have aboard the Holy Spirit that sounds an alarm that lets us know that you're just about to get in a trap. And once you get in the trap, and maybe you don't have a new car with the sensor, but I was sharing with Kelly, we were traveling and we were on the road, and when you're on the freeway, if you notice, not like I was a kid, but they started putting these things on the side, they call them rumple strips. And so even if you've got an old car and you drive down the road, if your car hit those strips, your car's like bumpity, 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 and it wakes you up. Anybody? I know that all of you are perfect drivers, but if anybody here has ever been driving for a long time and you start to doze off a little bit, you hit those strips and bumpity, 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 and it says wake up. Well, see, when we have the Holy Spirit on board in our lives, when it seems that we're headed toward the trap because we've fallen asleep for a minute, something ought to tell us spiritually, bumpity, 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 it's time for you to get back on the road and wake up. And so don't get trapped, because if you get trapped into situations, it automatically pulls you into a conundrum of sadness and depression, and it brings you to a place where it's difficult for you to get out of where you are. I've met a whole bunch of folks that find themselves in a situation, and because they allowed it to go too far, they didn't know how to get out. And so don't let yourself get trapped. But then look at verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In order to keep on keeping on, don't get trapped, but then get good gifts. Get good gifts. We live in a culture now whereby people have trouble getting good gifts. They wonder why. It's because we've lost some of our manners. We've lost some of our manners. When I was growing up, they had a book. They had a couple of books. One book was called Emily Post. Emily Post had all of the rules in it in terms of how you are supposed to act socially. And then there was another one called Miss Manners. You bought these books and they would tell you how to send out a proper invitation, and they would tell you how to set the table, and they would tell you how to send a thank you after someone had given you a gift, and so on and so forth. In this electronic age, we have forgotten our manners. We've forgotten our manners. We oftentimes now, we don't send out proper invitations. We send text messages and emails and those kinds of things, but we don't send out proper invitations. And because we're so instant, we oftentimes don't take the time, even in our emails and our text messages, to give them a proper amount of time. You know, just to kind of give you an idea, when you invite someone to something, you should at least give them 2 weeks. Your invitation should arrive 2 weeks prior to your event. And it's just good manners. And so you send your invitation out. That way the person has time to put whatever it is you're inviting them to on the calendar. Now, that's not the part I really want to talk about. What I really want to get to is that once you sent an invitation and someone says that they are coming and they come to your event, there was a time when if someone came, we said, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad you came. It was so wonderful to see you. It was more than great to see you. Thank you so much for the wonderful gift, those kinds of things. We've kind of dropped that by the wayside. We don't say thank you like we used to. We don't send out cards like we used to. Now, I'm not saying everybody. There's some people who are still reading Emily Post and they're still responding and so on and so forth. But I'm getting somewhere here. Just follow me. Don't get mad yet just because you didn't send out a card. But I'm trying to share something with you here. The fact that we've lost our manners with each other has caused us to also lose our manners with God. Okay, now you ready to see this? When we cheapen the occasion, we cheapen the gift. When we cheapen the occasion, we cheapen the gift. So if you invite me by text message and email and tell me that you're having whatever the event might be, wedding anniversary or whatever, you send me a text message. It comes 3 days before your event. Now you know what I think automatically, and what you think. You might not even realize that you think this, but it automatically sends a message to us that says that that event is not important. One, you just invited me 3 days prior to it. So maybe you haven't planned this out so well. Two, you invited me by a text message. And so therefore you didn't put any investment in your invitation. And because there's no investment in your invitation, and because you haven't planned it out well, then what do you think I think about bringing you a gift? And sometimes I may not even show up. I'll send you a text message back that says, congratulations, I can't make it. So, because you decided that you would quicken the process, now your gifts don't look like they would look had you taken time. Because if you take time to plan it out and you formally invite someone and they, look at the time that you went through, they say then that this message that's being sent says this must really be important to them because they're planning it out. This is taking place next month. They send it to me in the mail, and even if they send an email, I'm not totally against emails in manners in terms of inviting people, but they at least went to one of those invitation sites and sent me a nice invitation with the little flowers around it and the music that plays, guess who's been married 40 years, and so on and so forth. I see that, and I began to think that it must be important because they have taken the time for it. And so I then decide that I'm going to give a better gift. Our invitation to God is so important. Our invitation is important, but it's the afterthought that's more important, because what really seals the deal is that you take the time to invite me. I come, I bring a gift, and when I bring the gift, you don't just say thank you, but in return, you send me a very nice email, a note, a text message, maybe a letter, a card, or something that says, I really appreciated the gift. Thank you so much. Now, once I receive that, then you know what's going to happen? Every time you invite me to something, I'm going to bring you something nice because I'm waiting to see how they're getting ready to say thank you. Guess what God is looking at you for? The Lord wants us to be appreciative. He's come to the table and he's brought so much. He brought his son that died for us. And so our appreciation is important so that we're able to get the good gifts. When we don't say thank you, it seems that we really don't care about what God is doing for us and in our lives. And so he says that when I bring a gift, look at the kind of gift that the Lord brings. When he brings one, there's no changing in it, because he is the Father of light. He's the Father of light. When he brings a gift, he brings a great gift. He brings a wonderful gift. There's no shadow in it. There's no fault in it. It did not come from the clearance aisle like many of us do. It did not come from the scratch and dent. When he brings us something, he brings us something wonderful. He brings us something great. He brings us something that does not change. And so how do you keep motivated? You get the good gifts. You say thank you. You be manable. And you appreciate what God has given you. But then you recognize your place. Now, one of the reasons that people used to use Emily Post and Miss Manners is because, and let me be, this is the best way I know to say it, is oftentimes we talk about it today, we say that, well, that was just purely ghetto. And now y'all can tell that if you want to, but I'm just going to be transparent here. I've heard people say, well, you know, I went to a wedding the other week and it was the most ghetto wedding I ever went to. Now, number one, let me tell you that everybody in the ghetto is not without manners. There are some very bougie folk in the ghetto with good manners. Some of us, notice I place me in there. Some of us in the ghetto know how to set our table, even though it's in the ghetto, and even though we serving peanut butter and Spam, we still know how to set the table. But I think you know what it means when somebody says that's just purely ghetto. It really means that they don't have any manners. People with manners use manners because they know who they are. Look at verse 18, I'll show you. Of his own will begot he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruit of his creatures. In order to keep on keeping on, you need to know your place. See, oftentimes when we don't use good manners because we just don't realize that we ought to. Or we don't realize who we are. When we realize who we are, then we have a sense of duty. And that sense of duty causes us to keep good manners even when it seems that we don't feel like it. Could you imagine, or have you not heard that here recently, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, allowed herself to be filmed while going to visit a group of reporters. But one of the things that she has never done and refuses to do is Queen Elizabeth refuses to do an actual interview. She will not allow anyone to interview her. And anytime they take a picture of her, the people who take a picture of her have to be in the royal photography department. Just anybody cannot just walk up and snatch a picture of the Queen of England. In other countries, they do the same thing. If you go to North Korea, you're not allowed to take any pictures of the person in charge there. You cannot just take pictures of these heads of state. It's against the law. Now here's why. and some of you might get upset, but you realize that I like Facebook and Instagram as much as the next. But you've heard me say before, I wouldn't just put any picture of myself out there. Now, the reason why is because I recognize and I believe that I am a child of the King. Now, not a king, I'm a child of the King. And because I am a child of the King, it says that I belong to a royal priesthood, according to the book of Hebrews. And because I belong to that royal family, then I could not allow myself to be photographed any kind of way. I'm going somewhere. I wish you'd follow me. I can't allow myself to be photographed any kind of way. The Queen Elizabeth, I understand that she is not to be photographed just any kind of way, because it takes away from the perception of who she is. She realizes that she is royalty, so you'll never find a picture of Queen Elizabeth in her nightgown. Her husband was in the hospital last week. They don't have any pictures of her husband in the hospital. Don't have any pictures of her husband entering the hospital, and you don't see him in his hospital gown and in the hospital bed and all of that, because he recognizes that he is royalty, and people ought not look upon him and see him any kind of way. Oh, I wish I had some Christians in this church. There are some of us who allow ourselves to be photographed, both mentally, physically, emotionally. We allow people to take pictures of us in all kinds of compromising positions, and then we wonder why they don't respect us. It's because we know that you are not royalty. But when you are royalty, when you've been accepted into the house and the family of God, then a certain emotion ought to come on you to know that now I am somebody. I am the first fruit because God has made me that way, and because he made me that way, I don't want to be seen just any kind of way. Oh, I went to visit my great aunt, as I told you a few weeks ago. She's 97 years old, 98 years old, 99 years old now. She was 98 when I went to visit her. And so we went to visit her. And so she looked around, she said, I got to put my wig on. And she had about 3 or 4 wigs in the chair. I had put my wig on, sitting here with no wig on. I said, it's all right, don't worry about that. We family. And so got ready to leave, and Kelly, just like a Asian person, Asians are known for taking pictures when they're tourists, and Kelly snapping pictures, and so she bought out her camera, she's going to take a picture. I said, no, can't take no picture without my wig on. She didn't want anybody to see her without her wig on. We as Christians, our behavior ought to be captured by who we are. We ought to be motivated by the fact that we are children of God. And because we are children of God, our character ought to be captured by his presence. And when we're out of character, it should only be in God's presence. See, I'm not going to say that the Queen of England never puts on a nightgown, but she never lets you see it. And so there are certain things in our life. I'm not saying that the Christian will never have depression, never had sad days, never had bad days. I will say that there are times when you're going to have some situations and issues in your life, but you don't let the world take snapshots. Because you remember that you are the first fruit. One of the there are many significant things about first fruits, but let me explain just one of them. One of the significant things of first fruit is that it is a precursor to more fruit. Oh, I wish somebody would get that. If I just had one deacon that could get it. A first fruit is an indicator. First fruit is an indication of, more fruit. See, first fruit is an indicator of more fruit. See, when we lived in the Fairwood house, we had 2 trees planted in the front yard. They were apple trees. Those apple trees had just been planted, and for the first year we lived there, those apple trees brought nothing but leaves. We didn't get excited. There was nothing to get excited for, because all you got was leaves. And so then next year it came out, and there was some leaves, and then all of a sudden you saw some little bitty things growing on the tree that looked like grapes. I saw those little things coming out looking like grapes. The first year there was nothing to be excited about. But the next year there was something there. But guess what? The first year you can't eat the apples that come off the tree. First apples that come off that tree, you can't eat them. They're worthless. They're no good. Other than they are an indication. Oh, come on, man. They are an indication that there's more fruit. So sometimes in your life, you're going to find yourself in a place where it seems like you're worthless, where it seems like you have no value. But because you are God's child, even though the season might not be today, there is an indication that more fruit shall come. So keep on keeping on. You might not be worth much today, but keep on. Because it is an indication that more fruit shall come. Oh, brother, man, since you don't know what it gets, can I talk to you? See, let me tell you. When they say that you are the assistant manager, that's just the first fruit to say that ultimately you can be the manager. All right. See, the assistant manager gets to take the courses that will ultimately lead to be the manager. See, when you work 9 to 5 and they make you the assistant manager, they give you a little raise, and that is an indication that other raises shall come. And so when you feel bad, when you feel depressed, when it seems like somebody's bothering you and on your nerve, all you've got to do is remember that I've seen some first fruit, and God, I trust you that you're not a God that wavers and goes backward, but that you're taking me forward. So I'm glad to be who I am today, but I'm reaching for everything that God has for me, and I'll keep on keeping on, because the first fruit is an indication that more fruit shall come. All right. Amen. So you keep on keeping on because you know your place. Keep on keeping on. Let me show you something. Verse 19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. You got to learn how to listen. You need to talk less. Learn how to listen. See, if you really want to analyze the situation, stop and listen to it for a moment. Listen to it. I have good ears. Everybody in my family has turned down the ringer on their phone, the volume on their phone. That's because Kelly knows that I can hear the conversation on the phone. My ears are good. My eyesight is poor, but my ears are good. I was raised in a family where there are 10 conversations at one time. I can leave and tell you what every conversation was about. I can hear, and I hear very well. I hear normally to the faintest whisper. And people are whispering, I still hear. It's important that you hear and that you listen. And then there are two things that you want to listen for. You want to listen for what's being said, and then listen for what's not being said. See, as a musician, Brother White, you and I know this, brother and sister Littlefield, and anybody else who studied music, you realize that on the page of music there are notes, and then there are rest. You cannot achieve music if you never have a rest. Because there are some folk who stay on one note, and there are other folk who use many notes, and then they rest from the notes. And so in life, there are times when you submit a note, but then there are times where there must be silence in order to achieve music. And so our life, in terms of keeping on, we've got to listen, because as we listen, we hear both the negative and the positive. As we listen, we hear those things that will help us, and we know how to get away from those things that hurt us. And so we've got to be ready to listen, but then as we listen, we've got to be ready to speak slow, and as we speak slow, hold our anger even more. See what the text said? I didn't say it. Let every man be swift to hear, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and then slow to wrath. Be careful how you open your mouth. Be careful what you say. Be careful when and how you say it. Listen. That'll help you on your job. That'll help you in your marriage. That'll help you in your relationship. That time when you need to close your mouth and listen. Listen to what's being said. Listen to what's not being said. Take note of it. And hold your anger to yourself. If you really want to keep on keeping on, one of the quickest ways to lose a job is to be quick. And your mouth is open every time you get upset. Quickest way to lose a job. Quickest way to lose a relationship. Do you know there are times when Sister Kelly, I'm sure, gets upset with me? And there are times when I get upset with her, but that doesn't mean we share it every time. There are times where we have to be slow. I can think of at least one instance this week. If I said something to Sister Kelly, it's something that she did bothered me. And when she did it, it bothered me. And I thought about saying something. I said, I ain't said nothing yet because I don't know if that's what I don't know if that's right. And so I waited a little while, and the longer I waited, the more I found out that, you know what, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. And when I realized that, I said, boy, I sure am glad I didn't say nothing. Because she never knew. Now, had I brought it up, then we would have been at odds. So there are times where you got to listen, speak a little less, and then even then, make sure that you got your heart, your mind, and your soul tempered before you say something. Because it can kill your motivation if you speak and act out of season. Because once it kills your motivation, just as I said, as I'm preaching to a med today, you owe a little extra in the offering plate. I'm preaching to you today. I tell you, when you get to your job, people are going to get on your nerves. People are going to bother you. People will say things and so on and so forth. Listen, boy. Listen carefully. And as you listen, be careful before you speak. And when you speak, don't get mad when you say what you say. I didn't say it, text says it. Let me read it one more time just so you get it. Wherefore, my brother and my beloved brother, you're the folks I love, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Oh, let that sink in. Okay, now, if you look there at verse 20, you will see it says, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. And so, verse 20 tells you why verse 19. Listen to me now. Verse 20 tells you why verse 19. Verse 20, shut your mouth. Listen. Don't get mad about it. Verse 20 now tells you why verse 19. And here's why. It says, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. And so here it is. You cannot fight your own battles anyway. I could park right there and we go on home. Because the fact is, what difference does it make because you got mad? What difference does it make? What army are you going to fight with? Fact is that the Lord is in control. And you know, there was a question one day, they got ready and they were wondering. They said, what should we do about this man who's preaching and proclaiming the gospel? What should we do? Some wanted to stone him, some wanted to put him in prison, and so on and so forth. And a great rabbi came forth, a rabbi named Gamaliel. Gamaliel said, just let time settle it. Because if he's on the wrong side of God, God will take care of that. If he's on the right side of God, God will take care of that. Sometimes we ought to just calm down and let the Lord settle it. Because he knows the right and he knows the wrong. You know, sometimes our biggest issue is that we want to fight our own battle. But he says here, close it, listen, be slow to fight, be slow to speak, and here's why. Because let me remind you that we are trusting in the Lord. And the Lord is the only righteous God. All of our righteousness is but filthy rags. There are some folk today who are trying to decide which sin is bigger and which sin is smaller and so on and so forth. And I can tell you this is what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, your soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so you know what? At the end of the day, God will fight your battle. Just keep on loving. Keep on sitting still. Keep on listening. Keep on being slow to speak. Keep on keeping on. Get the good gifts from God. He's got wisdom for you. He's got enough for you that it doesn't change tomorrow. It doesn't change today. It didn't change yesterday. He is the same God. Same God who is righteous and mighty in battle. He is the same God that brought you out before and he'll bring you out again. I listened today as Montasia was dancing or miming to the music that was set forth and the songwriter said, stand. He said that you've been through the battle and you've been through the war. And as I was thinking about that, I got to thinking and I thought, Lord, I see this thing and I saw something that I'd never seen before. As she was dancing, what I looked at is I looked at a man whose face was scarred. And as I looked at the man whose face was scarred, I became scared even as I was sitting in my seat, because Brother Curry, the face that I saw was a face that had been through the battle and had been through the storm. See, some of y'all got good manners because you came from the right side of the track, but I came from the wrong side of the track. And see, on the wrong side of the track, you began to wonder and you began to know sometimes you can look at a face and recognize not to mess with that. See, where I come from, if you got somebody who's called Scarface, there's a reason why they're called Scarface. There's a reason why you're looking at them and they have the heel mark from the scar that goes across their face. When you look at them and you see the nicks and the knacks of fighting on them, then you begin to recognize that they've been through something. And because they've been through something, that lets you know this one might be a tough one to fight. You know, when Jesus came forward, so I asked the Lord, I said, what does this mean? And then I had been thinking about something that we've been talking about for days now, because we were asking the question whether it's okay to doubt God or not. That is a question in our life groups not too long ago, and we were asking that question, is it okay to doubt God? And so I said, you know, I don't necessarily know if I know the answer that you all are looking for. Because number one, it depends on how you define doubt. There are some people who say, well, there could be a misunderstanding. Maybe our finite mind is not able to comprehend his infinite mind. And then the first thing that I went to is the man, Brother Sloan, who is known for doubting. His name is Thomas. Doubting Thomas was one who's known for doubting because he did not believe initially that Christ had risen. He didn't believe that this was really Jesus. And so what does Jesus do in order to prove himself to Thomas? He tells him, look at my hands. And he sees the scars that are in his hands. And when he sees the scars that are in his hand, Thomas then knew that this is Jesus that has risen from the dead. Let me tell you, Christians here today, all of us ought to have some scars on us. You know why? Because all of us that live this life have been through something. We've been through some fights. We've been through some battles. We've been through some trials. We've been through some tribulations. But guess what? I'm not still bleeding. I've healed. God has healed me. He's touched me. He's led me, and I've made it through the battle. I've made it through the war. And because I've made it, I can say, thank God that I've made it. Somebody prayed for me, had me on their mind, took a little time and prayed for me. And I've come through the storm. I've come through the battle. And sometimes you might be seeing the scars, but guess what? I've been healed because God has brought me through some battles. I see some scars in you. I see some hurt. I see some pain, but you can keep on keeping on. Why? Because there are some first fruits. You are a first fruit, and there is an indication that there is more fruit to come. Whatever you've been through, whatever your trial, whatever your tribulation, whatever your depression, just hold on, because God is still leading you and taking care of you. Maybe you didn't show no apples this year. Maybe next year you might have some little buds, and then maybe next year you'll finally have some fruit that's worth something. But you keep on keeping on because God has ordained it so. He's made it so. He calls it so. He's blessing you. He's watching you. His spirit is ever over you. He loves you so much that you ought to know that he brought you this far not to leave you. But I heard the songwriter say, I ain't come this far for him to leave me. Oh, I look back and see where he brought me from, and I recognize that he didn't bring me out here to leave me. He's brought me this far. He's brought you this far. So you keep on keeping on. Be motivated. Be motivated. Because guess what? I'm going to say it just like this. Baby, you are an indication that there's more fruit to come. Your life is an indication that there's more fruit to come. Your last raise isn't your only raise. Your last healing isn't your last healing. The last time you overcame in your relationship with your spouse, not the last time. Don't count it out, because God is still watching you. He's still loving you. He's still got his arms around you. Don't you think for 1 minute that it's all over. Jesus showed us that no matter how the cross may seem, no matter how the tomb may seem, we might know him in the fellowship of his sufferings, but we also know him in the power of his resurrection. I've seen him do too much to doubt him. So guess what? Your first fruit, who you are, is just an indication that there's more to come. Amen?